We did at times run into that. Folks say, hold on, let's jump to the technology part of this answer. Let's build a system to do it. And it was like, don't jump to the technology answer. Jump to what's the answer first. And in this case, figure out the methodology, do it among a couple of trading partners in Excel, and just do it and see how it works. Tweak it enough times to where you're comfortable, and then figure out what's the technology part. It works much better that way.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
On this episode of Power Supply, we've got quite the lineup. Stephen Downey, Chief Supply Chain and Support Services Officer at Cleveland Clinic, Allison Corry, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Intermountain Health, and Dietmar Hein, an industry supply chain leader. And Hayes, we had Steve on the podcast. I couldn't believe it when I looked it up after he reached out to me. It was over 2 years ago. We had a conversation around OTIF. And when he reached out recently, he said, we've made a lot of progress. I want to come back and give you an update. And, oh, by the way, the progress that's been made has been made collectively as an industry with providers and suppliers alike being represented with some standards that have now been developed and will be coming out this spring. So they're here to tell us all about it. And you know Steve pretty well, don't you, Hayes?
I do know Steve and Allison. I mean, wonderful. I mean, literally an all-star crew that we have today. So if you're a healthcare nut, if you're a provider or supplier, you need to be listening today because there's some things that are being set forth that everybody needs to know about. So stick around and come and join us.
All right. We're going to be right back. Steve Downey, Allison Corry, and Dietmar Hein after a short break.
Bam! I'm Hayes Waldrop.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
We have a power-packed episode for you today here on Power Supply. Steve Downey, Chief Supply Chain and Support Services Officer at Cleveland Clinic, Allison Corry, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Intermountain Health, and Dietmar Hein, Industry Supply Chain Leader. We're going to be talking a lot about the work that they've been doing with the Changemakers group, but it really harkens back, and I can't believe it's been this long, but a couple of years ago, Steve, you came on the show and we talked about On Time in Full, or OTIF, and really did a lot to just sort of talk about the benefits for the organization, how you define it, how you leverage it, what it can do for the healthcare industry at large. And then you went off and got a whole bunch of people together and have really started to do, some industry-wide, I'd say, innovations around OTIF. And so we wanted to welcome you and your colleagues back to tell us a little bit more about the work that's been done. So I want to welcome all of you, but Steve, we'll start with you and maybe just talk a little bit about that prior podcast and what's been going on since then.
Yeah, absolutely, Justin. The work we've been doing is so much broader. OTIF, one of those areas that we were excited about as the clinic was working at resiliency. On Time in Full is such an important part of that. Really what we came up against is these industry-wide problems needed collaboration to solve them. You need an ecosystem. You need players across all of it that can solve it together. One health system wasn't going to do it. And no matter what I did, I could improve the small world of the clinic, but it really wasn't going to get us there. And so what we did is got a bunch of real collaborative thinkers, people who are real get things done types across the ecosystem, and started with a brainstorm of what kind of problems does the industry have? Not one of us is big enough on the supplier, distributor, health system side. What problems do we have? OTIF was one of them, but what else is there? Brainstormed a list. Allison and Dietmar will remember it was like 40 things. And there's no shortage of problems. And that's kind of the thing is all of us go to conferences and we've been complaining about this stuff for a long time. You go, you talk about all these problems, people present on a given topic, they talk about how one party solved it, and then you move on, take your notes. We said we need to fix this stuff. We need to stop just talking about it. We needed a way to move on into let's start fixing it. And the idea was work small. So get the actual trading partners together and try it ourselves. And then across the small group of the change makers, try it amongst this bigger group of folks. And then from that, scale it to the industry. And we took OTIF as one of the first examples. Health systems, we have folks like BJC, Ochsner, Lina, Intermountain. Distributors, we have folks like Cardinal, Cencora. Manufacturers, folks like Boston or Medtronic, Siemens, Abbott. We have industry groups that represent the full cycle of it. It's not comprehensive of everybody. We kept it small that we could try things, but enough that we could be powerful when we worked at it. And OTIF was one of the first things. And we said, let's look at just the standardized terminology behind OTIF. And what has Walmart done? Let's learn from other industries. And then let's try it ourselves and then take it through the full cycle. And the exciting thing is we're at the end of that full cycle. It's been years in the work here, and I'd say a good 18 months of effort with this team meeting frequently to talk about what have we done? What did we generate? How do we propose things? A lot of these are really just agreeing on concepts, the way to go at something. And the exciting thing is we've done that. We're ready to talk about it. So we've been talking about it at some conferences and love to share it with you and your audience.
Well, we're going to be talking about it a lot more too, because towards the end about how what you've been working on is going to get released to the industry. So some references, but I'm going to save that for the closing. And I thought maybe you could, kind of introduce the collaborators, Allison and Dietmar, that we have on the call today and kind of the roles that they played in the development of, the standards.
Yeah. So like I said, we have health systems, distributors, and manufacturers as part of this. You need every perspective when you try to solve these problems. It doesn't do any good if it's just a health system and we solve it just for that side of it. It makes life more difficult for all the rest. And so we said, let's get everybody involved. Allison is one of the representatives from health systems, and I'll let her introduce herself. But then Dietmar is representative from the manufacturing side, years of experience on the manufacturing side. And we have others in the team, but these guys volunteered to come and talk to us today.
So, Allison, why don't you give everybody a little bit of background on you? I know Steve's been a former guest, but you're a first time on the Power Supply podcast. So I think people might be aware of who you are, but just in case they haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, why don't you talk a little bit about your background?
And Allison, please don't be intimidated by Hayes. Just please speak freely. Just let it flow, please. Really appreciate your time.
I appreciate it. I don't want to go too far back in the past here, but I'll try and get the highlights. So Allison Corry, Chief Supply Chain Officer for Intermountain Health. I also have responsibility for a number of support services. By way of background, I've really spent my entire career in the healthcare supply chain space. I started at Sisters of Mercy ROI many years ago. Worked at Aramark Healthcare doing outsourced supply chain as a service and account management there for a number of years, and really got to dip my toe in specialty services or ancillary services as well. From there, I went to Owens & Minor and working less in the distribution capability, but more in the solutions portfolio, which is a specialization in the procedural areas and unique supply chain challenges, bill onlys, consulting, analytics tools, et cetera. And then I was with Ernst & Young EY for 4 years working on large scale transformational change before moving to Intermountain 5.5 years ago to lead the procurement team, and then ascended to be the chief supply chain officer. But I'd be shocked if somebody doesn't know me because I'm pretty shy about talking and don't really go to conference events at all. So yeah, no, just all joking aside, really excited to be here. Was really honored when Steve asked me to join the group to really provide some of that perspective that I've gleaned over my years of the career and sitting in different seats, and how we can bring that all together, tie it together, and understand the perspectives of each to make change across the continuum and not just in one silo.
Yeah, and we're going to come back to you in a minute because we're going to have you really dive into the details around the standards that you all have established. But Dietmar, can you introduce yourself and also talk about, Steve alluded to it, but the importance of manufacturer involvement in this project?
Absolutely, Justin. So my name is Dietmar Hein. I'm with Siemens Healthineers for a very long time in various roles. I think what is important for our conversation here is it has always been in the collaboration with customers, such as the providers represented here, but also distributors in the healthcare space. I spent some time on the board of directors of GHX. This is how I got to know actually quite a few people in the industry and learned about the importance of products, which any marketing department will tell you are, of course, very important, but also the way how you collaborate is important. And it's not always the number one item on everybody's list. But when we talk about resilience, when we talk about what expectations are there, and from a supplier perspective, did I meet the expectations of my customers? It actually becomes pretty important. That is what is driving even brand recognition, if you want, to some extent. So naturally, if you want to do something about it, you have to go where it's a little bit dirty. You get your hands dirty and you do some very tangible things. This is why I was super excited when Steve called me and asked whether or not I would be interested in collaborating here. At the end, you have to do a leap of faith. You have to create trust. The trust comes through collaboration. We get to know each other. We get to know some of the dirty secrets, if I might say. So going forward, this is going to be interesting. And what you learn then is that the goals that you have as an organization are not mutually exclusive from goals that others have. There is a win-win, which everybody actually wants to achieve if you collaborate, stretch your hand across the aisle and learn. And things that seem straightforward. You ordered something, I delivered something, and everybody knows when it actually arrived where and when it was the handover, and you find out, oh no, it is actually not that straightforward. Even that visibility isn't there. So from a supplier perspective, knowing actually what is the goal line and did I meet the goal line, I can look at this all day long in my own silo and think I'm doing just perfectly fine until I talk to somebody and find out, oh my God, the perception is very different. So being in a room, actually we looked at Excel files day in, day out, and to compare the data and see what are actually the problems. And from there, it got quite exciting, and I don't want to steal this thunder that Allison will provide a little bit later when we talk about how we're going to address this. So for me, an exciting journey from the inception of the group, and Steve referred to a few of the other topics, so I'm looking forward. This is one of the first ones that is very tangible, which I think is important to us. It's not fluffy PowerPoint stuff, which is quite frankly something that made me very attracted to this activity.
A quick question, if I can just throw it out there. Obviously, some context around this to anybody. You said it was like 18 months, 2 years roughly. Y'all been working on this. How often would you meet and discuss these topics, and how many different topics roughly are there that you're going after?
2 at once. So we create 2 separate work streams. We split the group up into 2 halves. We meet in person 4 times a year.
Oh, wow.
And that may be virtual for one of them or 2 of them, but we do at least 2 a year in person. And then each work stream meets monthly. Each work stream has members from our teams who contribute to it. Generally, there's somebody who's really into that topic or who can run the data or do. So we pull those into those work streams. We have project managers on the work streams. And that kept a monthly cadence. And then when you saw each other quarterly, we could work at it for a while and then hold each other accountable of, are we making actual progress in the work, and move the needle forward to actionable things. It really drove the momentum of kind of collective accountability, because when you put a bunch of type A folks like we all were in a room, everybody wanted to get stuff done and wanted to make sure their work stream was going to be ahead of the others.
That homework thing is really important, though, I think, because you go to so many events and conferences, all well intended, and we pontificate about the problems. But this one really felt like we gave ourselves a homework assignment that we agreed to be committed to. And you really did have to finish your homework so you could put together the update for the group and solicit new parts of feedback. But I really think that's been a differentiating factor, is that we are willing to do offline work and assign others from our teams to get pulled in at the right times that have subject matter expertise that may be outside of my wheelhouse, for example.
I saw a quote today that speaks to that. I think it was Thomas Jefferson, but I'm not sure. But or maybe it was Thomas Edison. But the quote was
Tom. It's from Tom.
Yeah, it was Thomas.
It's probably Tom Jones.
It was, idea without execution is hallucination, and it really resonated with me because, like, if you can't realize the implications of your ideas, then they're not real, they're not substantive. And I think it's really important the way you built the construct of your group and the people that you brought in, so that you knew that if you're going to spend the time, that you were going to do something that was going to make a difference. And I think you all want that from the efforts of your time, right? Because it is so valuable. So anyway, I think that's a point that can't be under highlighted here.
I would just add to Justin's comments, first of all, the passion of us supply chain individuals and yourselves to add that extra time is commended. Number one, thank you for that. My question to you is, once you had these gaps that you're identifying, you had the people with their passion they wanted to dive into, how many parking lot issues did you get? You're like, we got to take that and put it over there on the whiteboard for later. Did you tease out some more pieces of this that you had to put in the parking lot?
Yes. What I would say the biggest thing we found is your tendency to stare at the problem. And a lot of the conversation, especially as we moved past OTIF into some of the other areas, you talk about the problem a lot. And meeting after meeting, we started defining the problem and mapping the problem and looking at different aspects of the problem. And we finally just have to say, get off the problem and start talking about how we're going to solve this. And no matter how action oriented you are, we stared at the problem for too long. Our parking lot of list of things to work on is like 35 things. I mean, we have plenty to go tackle.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Last point I want to make here, there's two important criteria, and I think Dietmar hit one of them. They have to be collaborative people. A lot of what we do is people driven, right? You may have great data, we have great systems, but if you don't have the right people working at it that are smart and creative and willing to solve it together, the people that are part of this group, like Dietmar, like Allison, are willing to just jump in and try things with each other. Not afraid to challenge each other, not only to say, Dietmar, where did you come up with that? Or that's a brilliant idea, keep going. So a lot of it is getting the right people in the room. The second is nobody's from Tennessee or a Tennessee fan.
Loving that.
That hit very, very deep. I mean, I don't know what else to say about that, but I appreciate you saying that, Steve.
It just had to be clear, Hayes.
Yeah, I got it. I get loud and clear. It came over strong. I mean, to your point, I commend you too. So you've got these two, you've been working in parallel, two different things. And so we talked about one. What's the other one? What's the other piece that y'all worked on?
Yeah, so call this phase one. We worked at OTIF and we worked at what we call data sharing. And the data sharing one was, could we take information generated from like ORs or inventory systems and have health systems share that with partners? And, can I provide lot number, serial number, quantity, item, in real time to help with a bill-only kind of process. And really, the more we dug at that, there's value to it, but it's not easy. Creating the architecture of where to share that, how to get it to the right manufacturer at the right time, having the right inventory systems or the right material systems or clinical systems to pull and share that data in a useful period of time. The more we pushed at it, the more we realized there may be some health systems who could do it. You have to be pretty sophisticated. There's probably like 5 or 6. And there's probably 4 or 5 manufacturers who could receive it. But is that really an industry problem if you solve it for 5 or 6 health systems getting data to 5 or 6 manufacturers? No. It would be a great thing, and it would be really helpful for those 2 groups. We talked about it, looked at it, tried to see, is there ways to do this, and then finally said, there's value in doing this, but we're just not there yet. It was a great example of go down the path and realize this is not one we should finish. And we pulled the plug on it, moved on to another one.
Steve, the thing I might say about that one is we pulled the plug on Changemakers, but being one of those 5 or 6 health systems, we've continued some of those conversations with the trading partner that's also in Changemakers to do a little bit of that for some sustainability and economic order quantity. And so it is exciting, but you're right, it is not going to be an industry solve. It's just not scalable the way we're set up today.
And I think it is still a success for us. Because you know what? Even if you come to the realization that you pull the plug, we give ourselves the latitude to actually go through such an experience. That's part of my commitment. That's part of everybody's commitment here to the group. There is no guarantee for success because we're trying a couple of things that probably people haven't even tried before. So it's naturally that you're not going to succeed each and every time. And that's part of my expectation, and hence there is no frustration about we're making the right decision and focus our energy that undoubtedly we have here somewhere else.
Appreciate that, Dietmar. And I was going to ask the question. It feels like a retrospective study from a master's class way back in the day. Hayes, by 1965 when you went to your master's group. But I think about what you parking lot, what makes sense for everybody across the collaborative, if you will, of what you included. I'm hearing a lot of human intelligence, and this could probably be a completely another podcast, but how much was AI part of this discussion point on the larger systems that could handle it? And was it something you had to put aside because it didn't affect everybody?
Yeah, we said in the beginning that we wouldn't jump to a technology answer.
Okay, thank you.
And it wasn't pick a platform, pick a technology, figure out, can AI solve this? It was, let's say, OTIF. The real problem is defining the measures. And then where that goes was, okay, now once you have that defined, now it's going to be a lot easier to figure out the where. And that's exactly what happened. We did at times run into that. Folks say, hold on, let's jump to the technology part of this answer. Let's build a system to do it. And it was like, don't jump to the technology answer. Jump to what's the answer first. And in this case, figure out the methodology, do it among a couple of trading partners in Excel, and just do it and see how it works. Tweak it enough times to where you're comfortable, and then figure out what's the technology part. It works much better that way.
And Steve, if I may add, and I mean, it's kind of funny, I'm not the chief patient experience officer here, but I'm going to say it. It is about the purpose of this whole thing here. At the end, it is about patient care. It is about how we can improve delivery of healthcare. And it starts with a problem. The technology, is it AI? Is it an EDI data interchange, a hub model, or whatever, is a way to solve a problem. But can we actually understand what is the problem that we want to solve to improve healthcare? I think that's an amazing commitment about this group here, why technology is not at the front and center in terms of problem solving. It might be helpful once you get to deploy something and do some real work on the solution, but AI is not the problem, hopefully not at this point.
I'm kind of thinking that at the root cause, the problem was a high degree of variability, which made it very difficult to control.
It's a study.
Which is why standards, right? So Allison, I know you all developed an equation, which we're going to include in the description. And when we talk about adopting the standards when they come out in the spring, we'll talk, a little bit more specifically around that. But can you introduce the equation and the standards, and some really important, key elements to the standards that people can start thinking about today?
Sure. So just to recap a little bit, there was a lot of analysis that went into this, because when you have a conversation, what is on time is actually a variable that people define differently. And so when you start to down this path of no longer pontificating about the problem, but how are we going to simplify this and make something that is, scalable for the entire industry. Once we recognized that it was measured differently by all trading partners, and frankly, even differently between different providers or different suppliers, we had to come to a conclusion on when are we going to start the clock on if something's on time, when does the clock start? And so that was really important to really think through that. And as Dietmar said, we did some Excel manipulation and really came to a conclusion that there's really 3 ways you could measure this if you looked at it. You could look at on time in full as at the order level, or at the line level, or at the line level times quantity, sort of an extended route. Now, there's pros and cons to those. So the first one is the order level. And if it's at the order level, that can be really harsh, because if you miss a single item in the order, you're no longer on time in full. And so that can be overly punitive if you look at it that way. If you go to the other extreme and you look at quantity times the line level, if you ordered 10,000 of something, it really skews the math to the rest of the order if that one was filled, but some other item had a line that wasn't filled. And so it's really too proportional to a skew. And so it gets skewed in and of itself. And so we found that the line level was really that Goldilocks principle that is the sweet spot, if you will, between the order level and the line level extended by quantity. So what this did for us is really allow us to say, there's no more debate. It's not perfect. It's not going to be exactly the way that everybody wants to define it if they could create it with their own magic wand, but it is the way that we're going to collectively define it so that we can make change and impact the industry. The other thing that's important to note, and then I'll get to the equation itself, but there's no exceptions to this. And I think that's an important differentiator. We used to spend a lot of time talking about, well, this is excluded from the calculation because it was weather, or this is excluded because of a data issue or whatever else. The idea here is that nothing's excluded, because we have had these conversations together as trading partners, and we need to work through those. And it's not always going to be perfect. There are going to be weather issues and other things, but how else are we going to identify a real problem if we're not talking the same measurement and we have excluded everything that seems to be a disruption? So because of that, we were able to really start to talk about mutual lead time. And so when we think about mutual lead time, I know Steve has a great example of this, and I won't steal his thunder, but if I have in my information system that I'm supposed to get everything next day, then I'm not going to get all of the items that are coming on ground shipment next day. And I've set up my trading partner to look really poor performing on time and full, because I have chosen not to customize anything in my own system. And so it really should facilitate, because we don't have any exceptions and because there's no more debate and we've agreed on what we're going to measure, conversations around what should the lead time look like. And maybe that's different for different product types. Frozen items, there's certain lead times that don't make sense with a weekend or a holiday coming in. You're not going to receive that on a Monday, for example, if that's being shipped the prior week. So really caused some internal thoughts that we really had to go through together collectively to make sure we were aligned.
Can I ask a question around that? Well, it's just interesting that the metric itself, if you were to remove all of the exceptions to create a scorecard, it's sort of like under ideal conditions, this is what we can do, right? But the problem with that is that I think a lot of organizations now want to manage by exception. So if you remove the exceptions, that's where all the work is, then you now have an invaluable metric. Is that how you looked at that when you said no exceptions at that point?
Well, think of it as kind of a continuous improvement journey, I think is what you were sort of hinting at. We need to look at the things that errored out that were a problem, because that leads us to where we need to solve something, or quickly we can dismiss it as a situation that was, out of our control, for example. But if you exclude them all, then what are you actually solving for to jointly improve? You're really looking at a myopic data set that is not reflective of where the largest problem is, which is maybe that I don't have the right information in my system about anticipated lead time for a particular widget.
When you remove the exceptions, are you also sort of like siloing? Like, is that what's forcing both parties to come to the table and tweak so that you can have some commonality in the understanding of OTIF versus like if you remove all the exceptions, it kind of allows you to operate, like the supplier continues to operate in a silo and the health system continues to operate in a silo when you do that. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's creating that joint continuous improvement opportunity, or the opportunity by forcing the dialogue together, because we now align that, yes, this is something that didn't go like we planned. And in the past, we might have hidden that data from each other by putting it on our exception list. And now it's the target list. It is the hit list for where do we have opportunity to make things improved together. And so you've come up with that list jointly.
Well, and I think for the first time, we're establishing an approach here where we can actually talk about the same thing because we're measuring it in the same way. So, I mean, it is the same thing. Now, if I don't meet the expectation, or my freight forwarder is having a snowstorm episode, well, then there are distinct reasons for failure, if you want, in the sense of OTIF. And there's something you can work on, and there's something you can't work on. And then for those where you can work on, this logic also allows you to clearly identify where's the ball, who needs to do something. And I think that's the beauty of this. With all the murky situation that we have prior to the introduction of this, it's not always clear where the ball actually is. You don't even know whether it's beyond the goal line or not. And I think that's the beauty of this. And you can only solve that through collaboration.
So a question I'm thinking maybe too forward, or I'm absolutely wrong, as Hayes would tell me. This is an intellectual group. And I'm
most likely
keep track, but I like to ask the fourth grader questions.
We'll ask them.
Points me. Here it is. I'm thinking about contractual language down the road. I mean, we're talking about all the entities as part of this. Is this something we're looking down the road as part of our agreements? I mean, we used to talk about KPIs as being the breadth of this, but if we're looking at that collaboration amongst the entities and that true handshake across the aisle, Dietmar, which I love that coin. I'm going to use that term. But is this something we'll pull into sourcing and contracting and from language?
I think so, Gary. And from the standpoint that when you have common vernacular, and we'll get to a common system to view it, now you have a common understanding of what it means. You can put the term of that in your contract. It's at the SKU level, and it really drives the point that you need to have that conversation up front. What is your expectation for these SKUs in how long it's going to take from when you ship it to when I receive it? And I think we got to be clear there. Allison's point was exactly the right one. It's order point to proof of delivery. When I have a UPS registered delivery, not when it gets up to my 5th floor in main campus, because that's my problem. It's when it showed up on my dock and I approve the delivery, it's been received. And so from when I ask you to when I receive it, and was it the quantity and item that I asked for? If so, you got 100. Great. Now, if I say, and if we both agree that should be 3 days, and now I can do all my inventory planning around that 3-day point, great. Right? If you take 5 days to do it, now we're going to have a conversation about why did it take 5 days? And maybe I have different expectations. Maybe I didn't, the docks were locked or something. It was my problem. Or I never placed the order, I got lost along the way, or the pricing was wrong, or, there's all kinds of reasons you could have it wrong. As Dietmar said, the point is to have the conversation about what went wrong, not create the blame, but you need to agree on the term and have the conversation about when you miss it. Because theoretically, there's a patient that needed that thing, and along the way, something didn't happen. Okay, how do we fix whatever it was to get it there at the right time? A lot of healthcare lives on just-in-time distributor shipments, and it's like autopilot. And so you just set all your items to one day, deal with it from that point. Don't even have the conversation about expected lead times at the SKU level. And next thing you know, everybody's rushing items. And why are we short stuff? Well, we didn't have enough inventory to cover a one-day blip of a snowstorm, or somebody has to triple scan a bin or something to go manage that. That's not the way to manage this. Up front, have the calculations, and then in your business review, have an OTIF review that says you are on track, or maybe you're trending poorly in an item, or maybe it's gotten better when your new plant opened with a new capacity line. It's creating the conversation about where it should be: demand, future demand fulfillment, resiliency, right? On a common term. And Allison said we first walked in the room, one of the trading partners said to me, I think I'm in the 90s for you. And I said, that's great. You're in the 60s. And we're both sophisticated people. And it was like, uh-oh, clearly we got a problem here, right? And it's all in how you measured it. And it was all of this, they were doing it at the line quantity level, not at the line level. And they were doing it based on ship day, not received day. Once you set those parameters that Allison just walked through, now you have a common point.
And I think it's also fair to say, given just in the question you asked about contractual relationships, the purpose of this group is to establish parameters. The purpose of this group is not to talk about how we contract with each other. I mean, that is and will remain up to the trading partners. Our contract with Cleveland, our contract with Intermountain, or whoever else is at the table is something that we discuss in a two-way conversation. But it gives us something that is undisputable and agreed to, not just between those partners, but across the industry. And it allows for an objective conversation. What conclusions you draw from failure, expectations, and whatnot is up to the trading partners.
Was there any hesitancy of the trading partners to do some of this? Because theoretically, it could be punitive to them in a way. Possibly, I think they could be viewed that way, because clearly we know why the systems want this, the health systems. But on the trading partners, is there any reluctance to go forward with this? I would hope they would, but any?
Right. I'm comfortable to say that for the group that is in the room or on online, if we meet virtually, no.
Good.
I would say, and maybe I'll leave it to Steve here, if the answer would be yes, then I'm not even sure the party would be at the table, to be honest.
Agreed.
And it's a prerequisite that you're open-minded and that you're willing to also share some more, let's say, confidential data in the sense of, let's open the books a little bit and have a look. I mean, I shared some information from us. We compared notes with some of Steve's people to actually go to the individual transaction level and understand. That's not necessarily the kind of information you have. Is everybody that is not in the room willing to do it? I don't know. But honestly, I almost don't care, because I believe that we have enough weight here to define this and move the whole healthcare story forward. And that's our responsibility.
We got to do it. I love that.
Good job. I mean, you can't really benchmark around this if you can't agree on how it's measured, right? Like, there's just a lot of analytics that can't be done without this common equation, definition, et cetera. So speaking of equation, like, I feel like we need a drum roll, or there needs to be some unveiling here. But what is the equation, Allison? And just a reminder to everybody listening, we'll have it in the description.
It's pretty simple. So the definitions, just to recap, all here in one talk track. The start is when the order is placed. The end is when we have proof of delivery of receipt, and that proof of delivery. The calculation itself is on time, is the number of lines that are received on time. That could be 0 to 100%. And in full is the lines that are received in full. Again, 0 to 100%. So on time in full is your on time percentage times your in full percentage. It really is very simple, and again, intended to facilitate discussion, not to be the most perfect measure of the nth possible degree that you could potentially measure, rather something that we can all agree to and measure consistently with an industry standard.
Yeah, I'm hearing loud and clear that the way to approach adopting this methodology and standardizing it is to be collaborative. not punitive in nature, the same way you've role modeled it as a group to have, true, productive, transparent conversations. Let's talk about some of the benefits too. I've heard loud and clear, what you all said. And, Gary's favorite word on the podcast is mission. And so, how this can have a positive impact on your mission to serve the patients in your communities, right? But I got to think there's some financial benefits. We talked a little bit about analytics a second ago. Maybe you could talk through some of that. Like, what are the implications? I mean, obviously you're not doing it, just to have the same conversation and the same measurement. You do want to impact, patient care, but you would assume that if there's increased efficiency on patient care, that there's benefits in these other areas too.
I'll do the health system side. Maybe Dietmar wants to do the supplier side. Having a common vernacular in measuring supplier performance. So as you have business reviews, everybody understands it going in. Walmart, there's a dashboard in Walmart that you can pull up, and how the conversation's going to go before you walk in the room. That's what you want. You don't want to surprise somebody with OTIF data when they show up at a business review. You want them to be able to know their performance at any given time. You improve your demand forecasting if you understand your actual lead time, and you can have accurate OTIF calculations. You can adjust that. If I know you're always going to be 75%, I'm going to adjust my quantities based on that, right? I'm going to adjust my lead times and my volumes based on if I know you're going to be at 75. If you're always at 100, I can change that. It changes your resiliency positions. Track record of very high OTIF is going to mean I need to hold less safety stock. If you have a very poor performance, I may need other suppliers. I may need safety stock. I may need other channels, right? It helps you with the agreement on terms. I expect this to be overnighted, or I expect this to be 3-day. Hold on, that's frozen. You can't ground ship that, and you get all that up front. So all of those, inventory planning, demand forecasting, contracting, supplier performance, resiliency, all come from having just that common vernacular that you can now measure each other for.
And probably not a big surprise that from a supplier's perspective, the benefits are actually not that different. I mean, first and foremost, it gives us clear understanding of the demand, as Steve just pointed out. Well, as a supplier, if I have a good understanding of the demand and I have stability in the demand, or at least some go forward plan that I know is stable, well, then I can plan my inventory. I can plan my manufacturing and purchasing activities to come up with the inventory that I need to ship on time and in full. So inventory planning and a lot of the other operational consequences are very much hinging on the achievement of OTIF and the expectation that is there. And then all the activities that are very costly if you are in a bad spot from your inventory or your demand development. Rush orders, stockouts, you have resiliency challenges there, you have cost challenges there, you overnight stuff at times where you probably shouldn't be overnighting it, and that can all be avoided. So from that perspective, the resilience element is one that we know for the healthcare providers ultimately doing the patient care is extremely important. From our perspective, equally important is the whole inventory and demand management. And this is actually a way, like I said in the beginning, a win-win where you can actually bring the two things together and achieve something that is good for everybody here.
We mentioned the spinoff project earlier a little bit, and it's kind of a conjunction of OTIF and some inventory optimization, but we're using the project to have more predictability as it relates to OTIF, therefore allowing us to reset our economic order quantity, which is sort of some of what Steve was talking about. And so we've been able to partner with at least one supplier to move everything to ground and try and do some shipments that are optimized at sort of a pallet truckload level. And so that's taking things out of air transport, which is cheaper from a freight and expense management. It's also resiliency because it's less carbon footprint that's being emitted. Like there's a lot of shared benefit. It's not mega millions of dollars, but they're all things that we think are important as you look back at our mission and how do we serve the patient best, but do it in the most friendly way to the earth and the most cost-effective way, and all things that we're equally interested in.
And I mean, the fancy schoolbook term for all of this collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment. I mean, you see it live in action here, and OTIF is one of the enablers to be actually successful in their journey. How far the trading partners can take it, I think that probably then depends a little bit on the ability of the various market participants. But the groundwork we're doing here is we're actually enabling this for everybody.
All right. So the standard's coming out in April, and you'll tell us exactly how that's coming out. But first, like, what's required, right? Like, so you've put this together, you're going to put these standards out. What do suppliers, and maybe, Dietmar, you can speak to that side of it, but what do suppliers and providers need to be able to do to adopt the standard? What's the lift here?
So we wanted it to be, Dietmar, we wanted it to be easy for everybody to adopt. You can do it right now. There's nothing stopping you from taking that equation Allison just walked you through, putting your orders through that method, talking to your suppliers about it that same way. This is really just about setting the standard of how to measure things. So no harm in starting right now. The question is, how do you make that easy? And how do I get transparency for both myself and my suppliers that we have it all in one place that we can view it ahead of time? And that's where we said, what's the best way to solve that for the industry as a whole? Rather than just say, we birthed a concept here, go figure it out yourselves. We went to GHX and said, what do you think about incorporating this into your systems and having a dashboard that your provider and supplier customers could look at, like the perfect order? It did the concept, same thing with perfect order. Now, that same dashboard, an OTIF dashboard, will be available in GHX. GHX will have the ability to take in the proof of delivery side. And so as the order confirmation goes, here is your proof of shipment. And it will have a UPS tracking number, let's say. And that UPS tracking number can pull up and it can get proof of delivery. And then the order has the acknowledgments of everything that got shipped against your order, so it can do both sides of the calculation. You'll have to be a GHX customer to be providing all of that information. But if you're a GHX trading partner, GHX now will talk about what does this look like in their solution and how do you get to it and when will that release? Those are all GHX things. They're working on it at the moment. We're expecting it to come Q1, Q2. They've been very agreeable in having this become part of their platform. And we thought that was a great answer because there's very little for the trading partner stuff to do, right? You've already got all the transactions in place. So now you have to use it. You have to have those conversations with your suppliers about expectation. If you never even open the dashboard in a business review and don't have it in your contracts, then you're not using OTIF, and that's your choice, right? You don't have to, but it will be easy enough that you could say, here is your OTIF performance, or a supplier could walk in and say, this is what my scorecard says. You have it in front of you. Let's talk through it.
I love it, by the way. Let me just say, I mean, you guys sat down 2 years ago, started brainstorming this, worked on this, workshopped it, and now you have a partner to actually build this, the technology side of it, and it's coming to market in a couple months. That is impressive. And again, it was much needed, and I have to just say, hats off to all of you. This is great. This is fantastic.
That's because Dietmar and Allison are impressive. I mean, what else do you expect?
Well, I mean, you have to have that's a good point you make there, Steve. But I'm sure there's some others in there, including yourself, that need to get a pat on the back. Yeah,
it was a team effort. And kudos to the team that worked on it. And kudos to GHX for saying, we'll listen to you. Thanks for bringing this to us. Thank you for working on the standard. I think the key to this was it was a problem we've all talked about. We all were solving it different ways. Nobody had said, can we just solve it this way and see how it does? And there's no Walmart in our industry, right? There's nobody with 40% of the transaction volume to go solve that. So take a bunch of us in a room, go work at it for a while, make the mistakes in very small groups, figure that out. It'll tweak over time. It'll have a life of its own. Fine. But just start. And now we'll have a platform that we can start. We can start those conversations. It'll adjust over time in GHX's platform. 10 years from now, somebody will look back and say, do you remember that podcast we did around OTIF with GHX? Look where it is now, right? Like 10 years from now, whatever. We got it started. And it's way better now. Great. At least it's out there.
Good job. Great job.
Is it too early to ask where potentially this could be being presented at conferences in 2025, or is it not on the docket yet?
So we did present at ARM and SMI last year. And so we had work meetings around both of those. It will be in 25 at a number of, let's say, similar conferences.
Fair enough.
Logimed, ARM, SMI, HIDA, all the industry conferences, those same industry conferences, somebody somewhere from our team either is presenting specifically on it or talking about it in their components of what they talk about. At some point, everybody's going to get tired of hearing us say the same thing, and GHX will start announcing it more, and it'll become common. So we started it last year. We're going through a program to talk more about it through Q1, Q2, and then it'll start tailing off. And eventually it'll gain its own momentum because we don't want to become the just OTIF champions of the world and talk about it for 3 years. And it will have a platform and people will start using it.
Yeah.
It's a great
job
great
to everybody that was involved, because I know that not everybody that was involved is joining this podcast. So this is really touting the work of the entire group and the members of your teams that participated in the project. And I think you're right, Steve. It will absolutely take on a life of its own over time. And once people start measuring, they're going to start to see, I think, applications that might even be outside of what you're thinking is possible today. One thing I do know, other industries have standard definitions and standard measurements, right? And that's what's going to drive healthcare forward. And hopefully this is, just the beginning, the first project of what you all are going to be working on, but it's definitely the kind of high level standards and best practices. Well, I don't even necessarily throw best practices in there. Standards, definitions, and being able to create that transparent communication that is really what's needed. And I'm sure you all took a lot of time out of your personal lives, to make this happen as well, not just your work lives, because it's a pretty heavy lift what you just accomplished. So just want to commend you for the time and energy on behalf of you and everybody that was involved.
Great collaboration.
Allison, Dietmar, Steve, I can't wait till the next podcast because you are going to come back with something else.
We're going to talk about that parking lot that's full of good ideas.
I think we just committed to 38 additional episodes, didn't we?
Yeah.
I love it, Dietmar. I love it.
This is good.
The Netflix series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, whoa. Careful.
That will overlap with Justin's there with the serial killer. But anyway, but thank y'all all. Seriously, this has been fantastic.
Yeah, you guys did a great job.
Wonderful job.
That was the all-star cast. Steve Downey, Chief Supply Chain and Support Services Officer at Cleveland Clinic. Allison Corry, Chief Supply Chain Officer at Intermountain Health. And Dietmar Hein, Industry Supply Chain Leader. Gary, this was a fantastic, I'd say, success story. It's just about collaborating, getting outside of the walls of your own organization and trying to make a difference at a national level, for an industry, in this case, supply chain. But this is what it takes to really move things forward. It takes collaboration. And I love how they approached it. Let's test this on Excel. Let's not make this huge undertaking other than our time. Let's test it a little bit, and then let's start to scale it out once we have something that's proven. The project management, we never really talked about in the conversation, but the project management of this was done superbly.
Yeah, I think having Stephen, Allison, and Dietmar on this, the collaboration that they were putting together truly defines the passion they have for the industry pulling this group together that a lot of those other individuals weren't named, but this passion to put us together over 2 years. They've been working on OTIF to get this, which they have a whole myriad of things behind it that are going to be impactful, as to your point, standards, not just best practices, Justin. And while I will say, drop the mic, all-star cast, great knowledge and great passion for what they truly believe in. I think it's going to make a lot of things in our world better and moving forward. So looking forward to seeing what the next piece of this is, as we're going to hear about it at many other conferences and many other agendas as noted as part of this. But I know they have many more things in the parking lot. So looking forward to it.
Well, looking forward to having these change makers back on a future episode to tell us about what they're working on next. Maybe, like you said, some of those parking lot items. On behalf of Gary Hayes and myself, thanks for listening to this episode of Power Supply.
Bam!
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.